The alternative to biblical theism is logically a belief in chance as ultimate. Either the sovereign and absolute God of Scripture created, ordained and governs all things, or chance prevails. These are the logical alternatives, but until full epistemological self-consciousness comes, few men are logical. Men may profess to believe in chance, but in some form or another, fate, necessitarianism, or determinism is introduced to avoid either the consequences of chance or the necessity of avowing God. Dorner observed, quote, "The idea of fate is found only in conditions where some attempt has been made to trace all phenomena of human life to an ultimate unity. Fate, indeed, is precisely this unity apprehended as an inevitable necessity controlling all things. It is absolutely inscrutable." Try again. Fate, indeed, is precisely this unity apprehended as an inevitable necessity controlling all things. It is absolutely inscrutable power to which all men are subject, and may be either personified or represented as impersonal. It is a conception which prevails wherever the mind of man is unable to frame the idea of rational necessity or of a supreme purpose of will, and it survives so long as either of these, though within the field of consciousness, is imperfectly realized. Further, men tend to fall back on the idea of fate when, at a higher level of intellectual development, they begin to doubt of a rational order or a rational end in the universe. End quote. The doctrine of fate is a recognition of the uniformity of nature and the unity of law which it manifests. It is an admission that the processes of nature manifest and order development and necessity, which believes which belies any idea of chance. Whether in the ancient religions of China, India, Egypt, the Teutons, Babylonians, or Greece and Rome, the idea of fate is present. This, however, is not true of self-consistent Christian faith. Christianity repudiates on principle all belief in fate. The Christian religion regards the supreme power of the world as rational, Hello, this is Nathan. Thanks for joining me in the booth. I really hope you're enjoying the live streams and videos. To find out more about this narration project, or to make a donation, go to nathanteacher.com. Thanks. The Christian religion regards the supreme power of the world as a rational will by which all things are made to promote the ends of the kingdom. Here, omnipotence is not arbitrary, but is one with the all-wise will, nor is necessity blind, but rational, and likewise identical with the all-wise will, the will which always acts as a moral stimulus to the freedom of man. Only when freedom and necessity are recognized as being one and the one. Only when freedom and necessity are recognized as being one in the deity is it possible for destiny to give place to providence. Only when man realizes his freedom as that which lays upon him the obligation of self-determination in the sphere of conduct does he cease to resort to the occult arts. And only as he knows that all things can be utilized for the highest ends does he finally break with the idea of fate. These beliefs, however, constitute, in essence, the Christian point of view. End quote. The purpose of the idea of fate is to give man God without God, that is, the advantages of God's government and order. That is, the advantages of God's government and order without God himself. Man, however, not only opens the door to a schizophrenic state of mind by adopting the idea of fate, but he also lets in occultism, the powers of darkness and irrationality. Citing Dorner again, we find him, despite a defective theology, aware of the many implications of fate. Quote, as a matter of fact, the belief can be finally extirpated only by this recognition of a rational goodwill determining the natural order with reference to an end, and harmonizing therewith the law of necessity, physical causality. This brings us, however, face to face with the subjective conditions in which the belief in fate subsists, and in which, again, its climatization, I was thinking, for some reason. Subsists, and in which again its elimination is possible. So long as man feels himself simply impotent in relation to nature and thinks of himself as a mere atom in the universal order, he remains subject to fate, to necessity. So long as he regards his position and lot as something given to which he must adapt himself, he cannot rise above the notion of fate, nor is any deliverance possible, in spite of all attempts to improve his position, so long as he is disposed to eudaimonism. Yeah, I'm going to look up how that should be pronounced, because I don't know. Eudaimonism. Okie doke, that was useful. At least told me where. So long as he is disposed to eudaimonism, and consequently dependent upon circumstances or upon nature, eudaimonism, making pleasure the end of life, strikes at the springs of moral energy. It makes men the thrall of the things which promise enjoyment and which fate is supposed to bestow or deny. The man who, on the other hand, regards it as his task to realize a divinely ordained moral ideal will judge of all things in reference to their possible utility for that purpose. For such a one, there exists no blind destiny, no arbitrary will to paralyze his energy. For him, all things are ordered by God with a view to their subserving. Serving? I've never seen that word in print before. Ever. For him, all things are ordered by God with a view to their For him, all things are ordered by God with a view to their subserving his divinely ordained ethical task, and just because it is God who so orders the world, all thought of an aimless destiny or any arbitrary will is done away. End quote. The modern term for fate and fatalism is determinism. James K. Feebleman defines it thus, quote, determinism, Latin de plus terminus, and the doctrine that every fact in the universe is guided entirely by law, the doctrine that all the facts in the physical universe, and hence also in human history, are absolutely dependent upon and conditioned by their causes. In psychology, the doctrine that the will is not free but determined by psychical In psychology, the doctrine that the will is not free but determined by psychical or physical conditions, synonym with fatalism, synonym with or physical conditions, synonym with fatalism, necessitarianism, destiny, end quote. The word, quote, determinism, end quote, indicates the problem. The word means of or concerning the end. It posits a purpose or goal, as well as an ordered and rational development towards that goal. It thus assumes the mind of God while denying God. Because of the hostility to anything indicative of purpose in the universe, determinism has lost some of its earlier appeal. Naturalistic determinism posited a universe without God, but with all the order and purpose which only God could provide. To speak of a mindless purpose or goal is a contradiction in terms. Purpose and goal are products of a working, planning mind. Thus, determinism as a halfway house between God and chance ran into very serious problems which it could not resolve. The alternative was the probability concept. Probability is another name for chance, but it is all... Why did I hesitate? For chance, but it is also another name for determinism. As a university student, I heard a professor explain probability thus, quote, "It is probable that the sun will rise in the east tomorrow and set in the west, but, lacking exhaustive knowledge of all factuality, we cannot say that it is a matter of determinism, that it shall do so. To say that the sun will rise in the east is potentially provable by future events, and the presumption is thus valid that it shall do so. It is, however, a matter of probability rather than a question of determinism." End quote. This answer. Very good. This answer has the merit of sidestepping or postponing a resolution of the choice between chance and God. Since exhaustive knowledge of every sunrise is impossible and even theoretically out of the question until the end of the world, a decision is thus avoided by these mental gymnastics. This evasion of the problem does not diminish it, but rather intensifies it, since no acrobatic stance is more than briefly tenable. Determinism offered a mindless necessity which still bore traces of an end or purpose. The probability concept aims at an even more mindless universe. Confronted with a mindless universe, man can either attempt to play God over it, or recoil in horror at the totality of mindlessness. Man does both. He acts as God, but mind, having been devalued by his own philosophical conclusions concerning the universe, man sees his own thinking as worthless and unimportant. There is an abdication of philosophy and There is an abdication of philosophy in the mind and of the mind. There is an abdication of philosophy and of the mind. Man becomes a mindless God. This was apparent as early as Charles Darwin, who both affirmed chance and denied it, who read God's design into the processes of nature while denying God and design. In a letter to W. Graham, July 3, 1881, Darwin wrote, quote, "Nevertheless, you have expressed my inward conviction, though far more vividly and clearly than I could have done, that the universe is not the result of chance. But then, with me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind? Is there any convictions in such a mind?" End quote. To a considerable degree, Darwin's comments was due to his habit of sidestepping any intellectual issue which opened up the possibility of self-contradiction. There was, however, a significance in his evasion. He appealed to the absurdity of all thought in terms of man's origin. He would not have made this appeal or allowed it to invalidate his theory. He did use it to invalidate problems because he recognized the force of the argument. In Darwin's world, the mind of man is as meaningless as the world is. Man's mind is an adaptation to his environment, supposedly, and only time will tell whether or not it is a sound adaptation. Beyond that, it has no validity. This overpowering sense of meaninglessness has led to a growing mental problem. According to the psychiatrist Dr. Viktor E. Frankl, quote, "A cross-sectional statistical survey of the patients and the nursing staff was conducted by my staff in the neurological department at the Vienna Polytechnic Hospital." Polyclinic. I did wonder. A cross-sectional statistical survey of the patients and nursing staff was conducted by my staff in the neurological department at the Vienna Polyclinic Hospital. It revealed that 55% of the persons questioned showed a more or less marked degree of existential vacuum. In other words, more than half of them had experienced a loss of the feeling that life is meaningful. This existential vacuum manifests itself mainly in a state of boredom. Now, we can understand Schopenhauer when he said that mankind was apparently doomed to vacillate eternally between two extremes of distress and boredom. In actual fact, boredom is now causing and certainly bringing to psychiatrists more problems to solve than it is more problems to solve than is distress. And these problems are growing increasingly crucial, for progressive automation will probably lead to an enormous increase in the leisure hours of average workers. The pity of it is that many of them will not know what to do with all their newly acquired free time. Let us think, for instance, of, quote, Sunday neurosis, end quote, that kind of depression which afflicts people who become aware of the lack of content in their lives when the rush of the busy week is over and the void within themselves becomes manifest. Not a few cases of suicide can be traced back to this existential vacuum. Such widespread phenomena as alcoholism and juvenile delinquency are not understandable unless we recognize the existential vacuum underlying them. This is also true of the crises of pensioners and aging people." End quote. In the older terminology, fate was sometimes called destiny, and by destiny was meant inevitable necessity, fortune or doom. Fate, destiny, determinism and probability all concern an impersonal and mindless dealing with man and the universe. Everything in man is contradicted by this mindless necessity. Man's goodness and works are confounded and rendered futile. Man's evil can be rewarded or punished without any logic, because no logic exists in mindless necessity, which is a determination by remote, meaningless, and arbitrary forces. For this reason, fate or destiny is always a horror to the mind of man. Providence and predestination, however, undergird man by manifesting that everything in the universe is under the total control of the mind of God. Not an impersonal necessity, but a personal purpose governs all things. This government is not in contradiction to, but in unity with the mind of man. The secondary causality and freedom of man are in unity with and under the jurisdiction of the primary causality and freedom of God. Thus, St. Peter could say in full assurance, quote, "But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, an holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvellous light, which in time past were not a people, but are now the people of God, which had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. 1 Peter 2, 9 and 10. These words recall such Old Testament passages as Exodus 19, 5 and 6, Deuteronomy 7, 6 and 7, Isaiah 43, 10, 20, 44, 1 and 2, and others, and carry their promises to a new degree. The priest The priesthood of the Old Testament was not royal. Only in Melchizedek, Hebrews 7:1, etc., do we find the royal priesthood, not in Israel. St. Peter tells us, according to Lenski, that, quote, we occupy such a high... All the wrong words. We occupy so high a position that no man can be higher in this life. As a, quote, priesthood, end quote, a body that is made up entirely of priests, no man stands between us and God, and as a body of, quote, royal, end quote, priests, no man stands over us in our relation to God. The adjective as well as the noun reveal in a double way the exaltation of our position and our function, the constant, direct, immediate contact with God, end quote. Man, we are told, is linked in a royal and priestly way to God and to the ultimate purpose which governs every atom of the universe. Man is not only vitally linked to the ultimate meaning of all things, but also in all God's meaning of all. But also in all God's creation, man is the creative. No. Doop. Doop doop. Man is a creature who is central to that purpose and meaning. The humanists claim to be interested in the dignity of man, whereas they are its destroyers. Both in man's obedience and apostasy, there is a dignity unknown in a meaningless universe. In his obedience, man is a basic aspect of a glorious purpose which encompasses all reality. In his disobedience, man is at war with that purpose and has the dignity of a combatant rather than the emptiness of an existential vacuum. The word used by St. Peter, chosen or elect, is eklektos. Chosen, elect, is eklektos, chosen out, selected, with the idea of grace, love, and eminence involved in the choice. Instead of a mindless fate and an implicit world of chance, the word chosen carries the meaning of a totally mindful, gracious, and providential concern for a person by the Supreme Person. The word, quote, peculiar, end quote, is in the Greek periopoiesis. Peripoiesis. Aleshapato. Shalati. Periopoiesis, an obtaining, an acquisition, or a possession. In 1 Peter 2:9, it means, quote, God's own possession, end quote. We are thus emphatically in a mindful universe. Okay. The next episode is XXX, The Return of Xander Cage, with all kinds of crazy stunts. And maybe possibly some car chases. Maybe some nitrous oxide, you never know. Some kind of smouldering looks. I'm guessing. It's only a probability concept. But, yeah, hope to see you in XXX. See you soon. Well done for listening right to the end. If you would like to know more about this important Christian audiobook project, please go to nathanteacher.com. Thanks.